ADHD and knowledge management. How does someone with ADD or ADHD, basically neurodivergence in general, organize their information architecture, data, note taking, and all that? Now, I don't think I have any neurodivergence. Some people thought I do, but I've talked to a lot of people over the POLYCAST who are neurodivergent. I've also learned from a lot of other blog posts that I thought were interesting of people who had neurodivergence and had interesting approaches to knowledge management, which is why I found them that way. And given that my system that I created is pretty adaptable, I figured I would share my take on this concept. Now, there is some sort of relation that neurodivergent people tend to be more polymathic because due to the split attention and due to like different hyperfixations and curiosity, it becomes a person that's a little bit more polymathic and reaching out to many different areas. And when you widen your reach, I think that there's a greater need than what specialists have to have an organizational factor. Now, I use Obsidian for my organizational PIOS, everything I'm doing for my knowledge management. However, I did use Notion. I think Notion is kind of a bad choice because it gives you too much freedom. It's great when there's a specialist who wants to be kind of a little bit more creative, a little bit outside the box that Asana will kind of limit you on, or Monday would limit you on, even ClickUp would limit you on. So you go to Notion to be able to expand out and have more layers of extraction. But if you have ADHD, you end up kind of getting into this cycle of tearing down your dashboard, tearing down your system, and rebuilding it. It was the same way for me with like Legos. I was trying to build the ultimate Lego Star Wars spaceship, and over the course of my childhood and teenage years, I would tear it down and rebuild it. And that was more of just a creativity factor. And I think Notion is a great way. It's kind of like Lego blocks, but Obsidian gives you a little bit more consistency and confinement. And it's a good kind of confinement. I think that people with neurodivergence need to find ways of giving themselves freedom to adjust, especially when the hyperfixation changes. And so that's why I created the modular degree for people who are polymathic and neurodivergent anyways too, who have that divergent interest pool. And so having a modular system, a modular approach is very key to that. But I think that really too, you do need to have some constraints or else you'll end up going too wide and you split yourself too much. So there's that quote, the jack of all trades, master of none, negative connotation, because you're spreading yourself too thin, but it's only half the quote. Jack of all trades, but often master of none, but oftentimes better than a master of one. And in the second context, the full quote, it's a positive connotation. But the thing is, there is this idea of flakiness or lack of time management. And so if you are splitting yourself too thin, and I mean really wide, and this is a slippery slope for people who are polymathic and neurodivergent, where you have too many interests going on, then you kind of lack a little bit of the consistency factor and enough time to do what you want to do. So there is a point of, is it a lack of interest, lack of curiosity, making you not want to push that topic anymore? Or are you hitting a plateau, a barrier of learning where you have to push past and actually level up in that skill or knowledge area? This is something I talk about on the Polymath Wiki newsletter on my site, because it's an interesting factor where sometimes when you're splitting interests, or even on the modular degree tag too on my site, sometimes when you're splitting interests though, you are going down one pathway and you're stuck. And you're either stuck because you hit a plateau and you need to progress, or you're stuck because you lost interest and you no longer want to pursue that. If that's the case, more power to you. But you might also try to stick with it and see if you can level up a little bit more or level up past the plateau if that is what's ailing you. So having a system that's adaptable to your needs is really key. And probably in the next video, I'll get more visuals involved when it comes to what my system looks like. But there's already some videos on this channel if you're interested about it. The PIOS, the Polymath Integration Operating System, or as I also call it, the Personal Innovation Operating System, is a omni-brain, if you will. I don't like the term second brain because it's too limiting. It's still, the para method's too specialist and too narrow focused. And I think that if you are someone who is neurodivergent, you need to have a system that's a little bit more omni. And so the way I go about it is organizing it on certain layers, certain factors. It started out kind of in this science kind of mechanism where it was like supra to micro to nano. That was the scale, but it was a little bit more complicated that way. So just for basic sense, you have yearly, quarterly, monthly, weekly, daily. And if you really want to get granular, you could technically go hourly, but I think that that's more for calendar planning and you don't necessarily need to get that way. And the daily actual layers, I don't actually plan the days in the sense of like, hey, I'm going to work on this for these amount of hours. I will do that on my calendar. And I'll usually try to have like a deep work time where like, okay, this is where my energy tends to peak. Let me have a deep work hour or 3 hours in that time frame. But there's also the matter of the daily layer is where I keep my daily journal, my daily notes. I keep my networking base, so if I want to connect with people or have guests on my show, and then I have my content, and so whatever I'm creating. And so since I have a variety of different topics that I'm focusing on for content, there are many different folders within that content folder. The next layer up, you have weekly, and that's where it's kind of like the planning. You want to try to plan out your week ahead of time. Granted, your energy levels are going to be changing, especially if you are overwhelmed from school or work. And so you kind of have to think about, okay, in this week, I want to get X, Y, and Z done. But if you delay your overall processing, because a lot of ADHD people do wait to the last minute to do it, then you want to try to give yourself artificial constraints without thinking about it. If you're thinking about it too much, you'll know that it's artificial and then you won't listen to it. But if you're like, hey, I need to get this done by the end of the day, or you have an accountability buddy that helps you, maybe there's actually an AI chatbot you can probably do for it. Maybe we need to build it too. I don't know. But essentially, you can have like an AI buddy or a real buddy say like, hey, we need to get this done by today. And so by that accountability factor, kind of like if you had a homework assignment due at midnight, you can kind of crank it out despite the fact it's not technically due until the end of the week. And even then, that's still kind of an artificial goal based on what you're doing for your planning. Now, weekly planning is something I have a really hard time getting myself to do, so I understand that it's not easy for anyone to quickly adopt, but it is something I think the people who are neurodivergent should really take care of. I am talking more in the sense of ADD, but I feel like autism along the spectrum for a lot of people, depending on where you're at, I think that's going to be helpful for a lot of people in that world too. The approach will be different for autists, but I think that there is a overlapping layer of how to approach productivity when it comes to either ADD or autism. Now, the next layer up, monthly, that's where you kind of get a little bit more macro, you get a little bit more of the bigger picture, you might be planning out your goals a little bit more at that point, and I'll even pull up my thing here so I can look at it here. So on the weekly layer, you kind of keep track of your habit tracking, your systems. On the monthly layer, that's when you start really working on your projects. And the monthly notes will kind of be the consolidation of your all weekly notes, and you can kind of do a review and preview, kind of like at the yearly layer, which we'll get to. But you're essentially like reviewing the last month and previewing the next month of what you're trying to get done. The quarterly layer is a lot more philosophical, a little bit more out there, but that is where I've currently put my modular degree, for example. And so they talk about the 4 pillars philosophy, the mind, body, spirit, and emotions. It's a great way of organizing the 4 major aspects of your life. And people who are ADD might forget they need to go work out. They might forget they need to go make sure you're meditating. Or maybe you know it and you just don't have the mental energy to get yourself to go through it. And so sometimes by having a system in place, it allows you to fall back on those systems rather than rely on your habits, because you can't always rely on your habits if you don't have enough spoons, if you will, or energy cells, whatever terminology you want to use in that day. And then from there, you have the body pillar. So that's the exercise, physicality, maybe nutrition if you want to get focused on that. You have the mind pillar, which is the modular degree. The spirit pillar, which could be your religion. It could be more of like, I have Zen koans on there so I can practice just meditating on that. And then you also have the emotions pillar, so you can express more gratitude and try to work on your emotional intelligence, EQ, and that kind of thing. So that layer is a little bit more complicated, and we can get to it in a different video too, but I just wanted to kind of quickly go over it. Lastly, we have the yearly layer, and I think that this is probably one of the more helpful ones for people who are neurodivergent or neurotypical, but pretty much everybody across the board really needs to do more yearly planning in general. So I just want to like put that blanket statement out there. And then from there, you have the preview and review. So you're reviewing what happened already in the past, and then you're previewing what's going to happen this year. And that is something I really think is fascinating. Ali Dahl has a pretty cool template about it, I think, but I kind of expanded upon it myself. And the review was really nice because it allowed you to take a moment and reflect on what happened the year prior. And kind of see, like, did you accomplish your goals? What happened that kind of stopped you from doing it? What happened that kind of accelerated things? And that sort of thing. And you can list it out. And you're going to definitely be happy that you did that, because years down the line, you might want to look back on those notes and reflect on what happened that year. And you're not going to you can't trust your memory, especially people who are neurodivergent, because there's going to be a lot more information being processed in that time span. And so there's going to be even more of a memory delay. So you want to make sure that you are taking care of your note taking, so that way you can actually process back. This goes back to also another reason why I like Obsidian and Notion, because there's a ways of doing quick capture too. So you can use a plugin in Obsidian, or you can just use a database in Notion or the web clipper, whatever. And the reason why I bring it up is that since you're so full of ideas all the time, if they sit there in your brain, they're gonna sit there and prevent you from focusing on the task at hand. By dumping it out of your brain, by doing mind dumps, as they call it in the second brain world, then you can actually have a little bit more freedom and space to focus on the task that you need to do. Because if you're sitting there trying to work on something and you have something floating around, it's going to prevent you from doing it. That is something that neurotypical people have to deal with, but I think neurodivergent people have to deal with it a lot more. Other than that, I don't have anything else in mind to share with you today. But I've been thinking about this video for a couple weeks now, and I thought, I need to make a topical video for people who want to get into knowledge management, but that might be neurodivergent, so they don't know where to start. And if you have any questions or comments, you can leave them down below, and hopefully we can try to work that out and see if there's something else I can make another video about down the line. Thank you.